All right, this video is a basic introduction to some clay techniques so that you can get started with your mimic sculpture. First, you're going to need a few things. You'll be getting a board and a bag that your board will be stored in to keep the clay nice and moist. You'll need a canvas, piece of canvas, rolling pins. You guys will need to borrow these or share them. A slab of clay, and then some tools that we'll talk about in a little bit. First thing, after you get your clay, you need to work on wedging the clay, which basically means kneading it kind of like you would with bread dough. So what you want to do is kind of get it all packed together a little bit, and then you're basically going to be pushing it into the table with the heels of your hand, pushing it and turning it. You just want to do this directly onto the table because the canvas and the board would both absorb a lot of the moisture from the clay. And you want to keep your clay as moist as possible. Some pieces get stuck on the table, just pick them up with your ball of clay and keep working. So as you push in with your heels, you're kind of rotating it back to push it in again. And if it gets stretched out a little bit, that's when you can turn it up on its edge and then keep going. So you're going to want to do this for about 2 or 3 minutes. The purpose of this is just to make sure that consistency of the clay is consistent, the same throughout, and the moisture content is the same throughout as well. You don't want areas of the clay that are drier than others that would crack, and that can cause problems in the kiln as well. So, I'm just gonna do this for a few more seconds here. All right, so I'll consider that good. I've got my clay wedged. Now, I'm gonna show you, so it's called the slab method. Okay, here's my sculpture here, my sketch of my sculpture. So the first thing I want is the base of the horse, because everything is going to need to be built off the base, and I'm going to need to make sure it's balanced always on that. Okay, so I kind of want a circle-ish or an ovalish base here. So I'm going to take off about the amount, close to the amount I think I might need, or a little bit more so I can cut it out. Now with the other chunk of clay, I'm going to set it on my board, and I want to get a wet paper towel. This is something you always want to do when you have a piece of clay that you're not using. You want to wrap it in a wet paper towel. The reason for that is so that it doesn't dry out. Keep it as compact as possible, wrapped up with that wet paper towel. Therefore, that stuff will still be plastic for me to use later. All right, so I've got this piece that I'm going to roll out. So I can kind of start by flattening with my hands a little bit. I'm putting it down on my canvas. I'm going to take my roller and I'm just basically rolling it out. And I don't want it too thin. I want a nice sturdy base here for my sculpture. So this is what's called making the slab. Okay, just a thin piece of clay with a consistent thickness. That's called a slab. Okay, so I'm going to see how thick this is here. And that's pretty good. That's probably about as thin as I'd want to go. It's about 1/4 of an inch there. So I'm going to cut it out now. This is what's called a needle tool. These are things you'll have to share also. They look like this, or some of them we have on the ends of a pencil here. So this is a needle tool also. And you can use this to cut through the clay. So first I'm going to just draw lightly because I want to try to get my oval shape out of it before I cut into it. So I'm kind of just drawing around the clay right now. I'm just scratching into it lightly until I feel like I'm getting kind of the right shape. All right, we're pretty close. So I'm going to push through the clay now with my needle tool and just scrape along the canvas and drag through the clay. And this cuts through the clay pretty nicely just because it's a nice thin little tool. I'm keeping my needle tool basically straight up and down. I'm not trying to cut into this at an angle or anything. Okay, so now I'll just make a little slash out to the edge so I can easily pull this off. Okay, now I have extra right away. I'm going to smush this up. I'm going to put it with my ball of clay, keeping it moist. wrap it up again. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of smooth out the edges here. You can smooth the clay pretty easily just with your fingers. Sometimes if you want to have some water with you and get your fingers a little wet, that can help smooth the clay a little more easily. Okay, I'm going to kind of press into these edges a little bit, kind of trying to create a softer edged look to my base, kind of a bevel is what they call it. All right, so now I basically have the base of my sculpture using the slab method. Okay, it'll have that canvas texture on the back, nice and smooth on the top where I rolled it. All right, so I'm gonna set my canvas aside, bring my board back. Got my base there. Now this might be something I'll wanna cover with a little bit of wet paper towel also, just because I'm not gonna be working directly on it right now. And I'll need to keep that pretty wet so I can build onto it and always be able to attach things to it. Okay, so the next thing I'll show you is the coil method. This would be something that I can maybe use for my horse's legs and arms. Could use the coil method. It's pretty simple. You're just going to get a piece of clay. Again, making sure the rest of it's covered with my paper towel. And you basically want to make a coil. So you can roll it between your hands. And you could also roll it on the table. And the trick to it is just trying to keep it consistent throughout, not just rolling in one place. So I'm going to make some fairly thick coils. You can get these as thin as you might need them. But I want to make sure my horse has a good base to stand on. So maybe something like that. So I'm going to break him off. This could be for one of his legs. This could be for one of his legs. So I could start building off of this now, you know, figuring out the shape, attaching it to my base and whatnot. But I want to show you one other thing that you can do with the coil method. I'm going to grab a little bit more clay. Starting out my coil, I'm going to go down to my table, rolling it out a little bit more. You start to hear that flap a little bit. It's gotten flat on one side and it's thinner. So what I can do is kind of set it up on that edge and try and pat it down. So I don't want it to get flat like that. I might just need to slow down, try to get it evened out. Use my hands a little bit. When the coils get thinner, it gets a little tougher to control and easier to break. So you gotta be careful as you're rolling out a thinner coil. And especially careful to try and keep it the same throughout. Okay, so I've got my coil. One thing that you can do with the coils is if you want to make maybe a body shape or make something hollow, you can wrap the coils up. And now I'm making a shape. And I could end up, you know, closing this, but it's something that'll be hollow. Now to attach the parts of the coil together, I'm going to need to use the score and slip method. Okay, and this goes for attaching any objects together with clay. Okay, so again for scoring and slipping, I need my needle tool. Okay, these are the two parts I'm going to start right down here that I want to attach together. I need to score, which is basically just marking up the surface, both edges that I'm planning to attach. So here to here. Both of these are going to get scored, and then the slip is basically just the liquid clay. We can store it in these little containers. You can use your needle tool to get some of that, or you can also use one of these other tools that can help you scoop a little bit more. And this kind of works like the glue, so you can get a pretty good amount on, get it on either side, and then you'll attach these pieces together. Okay, and then if you wanted to smooth that out to get a nice and smooth look, some of these tools have smaller edges, and you can actually just kind of pinch them together and then smooth it out with the tool also. So you can use the coil method to get something that actually ends up looking really nice and smooth, but is hollow on the inside, or you could just attach it and you could leave that coil texture if you want to do that as well. So it can be smooth or leave the texture. Okay, so that's a little bit about the coil method and scoring and slipping. Now I'm not gonna keep any of this right now, but I'm gonna show you a little bit about modeling. So for the head of my horse and the body of my horse, that's gonna need to be modeled out of the clay. Okay, modeling is just basically shaping it with your hands. So let's say I would start with my head, which I might actually start with my body, but I'll show you the head. So I have a piece of clay here. I'm gonna put the rest with my other stuff here. I'm gonna kind of start with it in a ball shape. And then modeling is just basically manipulating the clay with your hand to form the shapes that you want. So I'm kind of starting to pull out that part that might be the head, trying to keep it smooth, pull out that part where the nose would be, kind of smoothing as I go. So this is shaping and modeling the clay. And of course I'll end up carving into it a little bit for the nostrils. I'll add, using score and slip, the ears and the hair. I could either carve in or add using scoring and slipping. But modeling, you're just basically manipulating the clay with your hands to get the shapes that you need. And then you'll end up scoring and slipping to attach it to other parts. Okay, so that's a little intro to how to get started on clay with your Mimic sculpture, and good luck.